Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast that explores the intersection of commerce and sustainability. Today, we're diving into the complex world of marketing, but for the world of circularity, and how we can actually apply marketing in the world of circularity and the fashion and apparel industry. I'm Garr Punnett, CEO of LoopLayer.
And I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at Reaply. Thank you all for joining us. We're continuing to interview entrepreneurs and industry leaders, and we go on this journey together to learn about strategies and examples where businesses and real life people in businesses are integrating circular economy practices and principles into their operations.
If you're out there in the world and you're hearing this, and this is a beacon of truth and inspiration for circular economy knowledge, well, maybe hit subscribe. That would be awesome for us. We're trying to grow this circular.
Subscribe.
Yes, we love the subscribe. It helps us understand that, in the silence of what we're producing here in our own little studios, that someone out there is receiving our message. So we're trying to grow this circular economy movement, and you could always give the feedback back. Reach out to us on LinkedIn or visit our new website at sellingcircular.com to reach out to us through the reach out format.
And I guess play your part in marketing and growing our podcast, but also your own role in circular economy. So please tell your friends and colleagues about Selling Circular.
Now, as we said, we're getting into the marketing world. We have our own marketing hands full with our marketing of our podcast. And this kind of gets into the complex messaging a little bit of how we communicate what we're doing to those that want to know more and get the information to them so they can apply it in their professional or personal lives, but then always trying to get the new ears, the ears that maybe have not heard of even sustainability, to get them to understand what then maybe that means for circular economy. And that's always challenging.
And that's true in our personal lives and our careers as well. And we've seen that parallel, or I think I've noticed that curve where you have to explain and educate. Yep. Like people are like, wait, so what do you do? And you're like, you kind of start general, but then you go into a little more detail, and they maybe ask more questions if there is interest. You keep going, and then over time people start to like understand you, but still with like a fuzzy outline. And I think that's like what's happening in circular economy today. I think you have to bring people and get them to see the fuzz.
I think that's actually could not be more applicable to what I overheard my partner saying at a party this weekend, where someone asked, well, what does your partner do? And she goes, well, he's in sustainability and redistribution. And I was like, well, redistribution's new. But she wasn't totally wrong. I mean, it's like we are collecting goods somehow and redistributing them back out. But it was that fuzzy approach where she was trying to figure out on her end, she knows what I do, but she's trying to almost relay it to someone else who's in supply chain so she's trying to make that message a little less fuzzy for someone who might be like, I don't know what circular economy is. So it was very helpful. She gave it a shot.
Yeah. And I think we do this as humans in general, right? You ask somebody like what they do and they're like, I'm in finance. Well, you're like, it's a buzzword. Like I get conceptually the direction that you're talking about, but what do you actually do in finance? Please explain with a few more words. So we go through this like weird educational personal marketing journey in conversations. And I think that happens with like all the buzz of sustainability concepts as well.
Yes. Exactly. And I literally could not get fast enough to some sort of version of I'm looking for a man in finance with some sort of eco term. And I couldn't make it work. It just doesn't roll off. But maybe we can figure that out to get some more traction into our environmental world. Go viral. But virality is not totally what makes up marketing for circular economy. It means that really what we're trying to figure out is how to present these unique challenges in ways that kind of catch people's attention. So how do you convince consumers to embrace pre-owned or recycled products? How do you balance sustainability messaging with the brand positioning? So it's a real, you're not essentially selling a consumer on a concept of low impact necessarily. It has to look good. It has to actually serve a function on the product. And so, how do you communicate the function and the features of environmentalism and sustainability? So, these are just some of the questions that we're grappling with as we go to really try to fix and shift towards more circular business models. And the apparel industry is some of the early circular economy successes that we can point to. Pioneers like Patagonia's Wornwear program, North Face's Renewed collection have both been paving the way, but widespread adoption still faces hurdles in changing consumers' perception and behaviors around secondhand clothing.
And to help us unpack all of these challenges and opportunities, we're joined by Amanda Lee Smith, the founder of Monday Creative, which is an agency that helps build expertise in marketing circular initiatives for leading outdoor and apparel brands down this journey of bridging their circular economy initiatives, sustainability initiatives with their regular product marketing. And her agency has worked on really amazing projects. Especially, we'll talk about this brand Arc'teryx Rebird program. The apostrophe there is catching me off guard.
Yeah,
Arc'teryx's
which, if
Rebird
people then just
program.
pass by, it's usually, I think it's like a pterodactyl. I think that's what it is like their logo, where you're like, oh, what's
Yes.
that fossilized creature? Well, that's Arc'teryx. There you go.
And they are doing some really cool work in a circular economy. And so she's working on how do you position their brand still in a premium and desirable way. So please enjoy as we dive into learning about effective marketing strategies for circularity and how to create compelling stories around pre-owned materials and recycled products.
This one, high energy. I liked it. It's fun.
Boom.
Thank you for joining us, Amanda. Today, we get to talk about some consumer marketing when it comes to circularity. I would love, because Sabira, I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I don't totally understand the relationships between agencies and branding and consumer marketing or content marketing when it comes to working with a brand. When do you get pulled into the conversation? When there's an initiative that's going to be rolled out to a consumer, when does an agency sort of get called into the mix?
There are no rules for when agencies get called.
Okay.
I'm going to say there's
so that
nothing
might be kind of the same.
consistent.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's ideals. There's a best case scenario, which almost never happens. I'll tell you when we typically get pulled in. We typically get pulled in when a team decides to do something in-house. They get really close to launch date, and then they realize that they're totally over capacity, or maybe they don't have the skills in-house to actually deliver what they wanted to deliver. And then I get an urgent email, and the project begins. We have sometimes these delightful clients that plan 6 months or a year ahead. Those are amazing. You know, I'm working on a project right now with a large brand, and they're so far ahead of themselves that they sent us the RFP and then went like kind of quiet, and they're like, we're all on summer vacation. We'll let you know in September, because they're so not in a rush. That's really nice. I love that. But it's rare. Depending on the brand, yeah, there might be an in-house team that's totally capable and will come in to do research, or will come in to do research and strategy. Sometimes we'll come in to do research, strategy, and execution all the way through. It really depends, because every brand is completely different in how their in-house team is set up. Sometimes there's like a senior leader, but there's nobody doing implementation. Sometimes there's nobody at the top to really guide the direction, but there's lots of really good implementers. So It totally depends on the structure of the team.
Okay, that's super helpful, because again, what we're trying to do here in selling circular is always painting the picture of the different levels of which things need to be sold. And at this point, there's an initiative at a large brand, a large firm. They have a vision for selling a product, and in our case, some sort of circularity initiative, some sort of maybe take back initiative in this. This is where I'd love to start to dive in. What you all have done, what you've looked at, what you've been able to now start to really explore is, at some point, this probably started with the first client or maybe a passion of yours. How did you guys get sucked into that circularity conversation when it comes to consumer fashion or consumer goods?
It was really luck. So it just so happened that in the background, I've always been a thrifter. I had also started kind of doing some personal resale of my own, doing some vintage markets, just because I like to think I have a good eye, and people seem to like the things that I source. So that was something that I'd been up to. But our main focus at Monday was actually like performance brands. So outdoor, active, better for you. And it so happened that our friends at Arc'teryx, this was actually right before the pandemic, they were getting their used gear program off the ground. It was really small scale at that time. They had someone who was leading their e-commerce team doing it off the side of their desk. They'd been trying to get it rolling for a while. It really wasn't a priority. And they just sent us a really small contract for doing branding of their used gear program. And it really snowballed from there. They had so much success with that initial relaunch of the used gear program that they realized this could be an actual source of revenue. And I think there were people internally that had a huge vision for it already, but just hadn't really been able to execute it. And that grew into doing the brand for their entire circular program, which is now called Rebird. We did some naming for it. We did a larger scale brand. We've done a bunch of their marketing for it specifically. And I think that piqued our interest. We realized, oh, this is a way that we can pursue our passion for performance goods and not feel like we're making a huge dent in the environment with the vast number of petroleum derived products we're getting out there in the world. We still work with brands that are creating net new product. We need net new product, but the more options we have available that are circular, the better. And so that became a real core focus for us. And since then, we did a really fun rebrand project with a company called Dbrand, which many folks in the space are familiar with and work with. And that just got us to probe deeper into that space and into our knowledge of it. And in the process, the team really has become kind of experts on how to position companies and position product that's circular.
Can you say a little bit about when you're talking about what you did for Arc'teryx, what did that involve from understanding the consumer perspective? Because I'm sure I want to talk about like what did y'all actually do to launch and what made it successful? But when you were getting started and kind of like thinking about how you might brand this and position it, what were you learning about the market?
Yeah. In the best case scenarios, we actually have access to consumers. We love doing one-on-one interviews. We didn't get to do that in this case. Sometimes it's just not in the budget. We do a lot of desk research. We look to kind of best in show, which at that time was really REI, Patagonia, Eileen Fisher. Not that many people were actually doing this 5 years ago. I think because we're all in the space, we see every brand that launches a resale program now, but it just wasn't the norm back then. So we were digging in and seeing how they were doing it and recognizing some of the challenges. Like there are real challenges when you're a traditional brand marketer and you're used to coming up with like a bunch of stories for the year that you're going to tell about product. It's usually based in like a particular line that's come out, a season. And obviously we can get into more of that later, but when you're dealing with resale, you can't base it on a specific collection. You can't base it on a particular season. You can't base it necessarily even on a specific colorway. So you have to get creative. But in terms of consumers, this is where understanding brand really comes in. And understanding who your muse or your ideal customer persona is. For Arc'teryx in particular, they had for years spoken to that core outdoors person, someone who's really extreme, someone who sees the value in an $800 rain jacket. And in the process, they kind of were missing out on the recreationalist, the person that walks their dog every day in the rain, maybe wants something that's going to perform, but doesn't think that they need the level of technical spec that an Arc jacket is going to provide for them. And so when we were thinking about launching their used program, we weren't actually thinking about a customer that's super environmentally conscious. That's not necessarily the customer that's coming to Arc'teryx. That's probably more of a Patagonia customer. That might be changing now that Arc is leaning more heavily into Rebird, but we were thinking more about how can we use this as a customer acquisition tool to get the recreationalist that's never going to pay $800, $1,000 for technical gear. And then we got into their mindset. How are they using this? What products do they care most about? If they're just going for a casual walk in the woods or a dog walk or commuting to work. So, yeah.
Again, I love that because it speaks to the almost the industry agnostic perspective of trying to just get an introduction to a new type of consumer who had a misconception, a preconception of what a brand was or how it did or didn't apply to them, but that this new price point could somehow introduce them to the quality, to the brand, to the messaging they love, and then all the upsell opportunity from there into other products, but then also maybe just increase marketability for just the secondary products as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is a easier entry point for so many, especially high-end brand. And that's where resale works the best, is in like a really expensive, well-made product.
Yep. Well, then you've mentioned Rebird now twice, and I've been actually I love seeing the new names that come out for the secondary labels. And so I have some of the top ones that I've loved, which is Rebird, Coachtopia. I wish they had done Lululemon does Lululemon like new. I wish it was Lulu like new. I wish it was just, and then Warrenwear is the classic. And then outer known.
They could have done Lulu line.
They could. I mean, yeah, there's a couple maybe, but I would love to hear your take on this, Amanda.
Brand equity.
Yes, exactly. I get
brand
that. So
equity that needs to be.
That's to my question here. And then even outer Warren from outer known I like because it speaks to that. What goes into that name? Like what? Okay, because I know there's conversations back and forth, 10 options. Which one are we going to go with? How does that all get sort of built out, and how do we actually get to a name?
So many conversations. I mean, Rebird's a funny one because it. I don't know if Rebird is the best possible name. The bird speaks to that Arc'teryx insider that understands that the dead bird, is the Arc'teryx logo. That I think for a newcomer to the brand, they might not get it. I think you need to lean into existing brand equity. So the name has to be in it. I think there's some, and this is not a slight on them at all, but Urban Outfitters, I think they're doing resale through Nuuly. And I always have a hard time remembering the name Nuuly. We don't have it here in Canada, but I struggle to remember it because it's not tied closely enough to the Urban Outfitters brand.
Okay, that's a really interesting take. Unfortunately, my partner is obsessed, so Nuuly is quite
it's awesome.
Active in our decision making of what we're going to wear outside of our house. Why do you say it? Why are you making that distinction? Because I think that's very interesting. I've always thought that same thing of it's such a conscious effort to remove the two brands, and that's a clear market choice.
Yeah.
Why sort of incorporate that into sort of that marketing element? Why are you bringing this into that conversation?
Yeah, you don't want to build a completely new brand. You want them to feel connected. You want it to have something distinctive so that you have a search term that's going to take you right to that used platform. So there has to be some kind of a qualifier. You don't want to overcomplicate it. I mean, we've seen every variation of added to things. Totally. I think that sort of played out, and there's room to get more creative. But I still think keep the brand name center, at the heart of it, and have some sort of a qualifier. I actually really like this name, though I heard from someone, I can't remember the context, that they've struggled with it, that Arc'teryx, Doc Martens used rewear, as in UAIR, because of their Airwear brand. And I think that's cute. It's cool. I think that they've had trouble maybe because of the spelling of it. People hear rewear and they instinctively think WEAR. But I love that they've used something that already existed in the brand. It is super straightforward. It does
and
what it
spoke
says
to their
on the
functionality or features that they have in their products. Right. That's really interesting.
Exactly. So to me, Rewear is a good name.
Ignorant question. Sorry to interrupt. Is why do we need a brand anyway? Like, should I just expect to go to Patagonia and just click on resale as a tab, right? Like, why does it need to? What benefits are there? Besides, you mentioned like being able to Google it and get there really quick, but Are there other
Yeah.
benefits that I'm not
I think
thinking
if
about?
you're trying to reach there might be other benefits. I'm going to give this some thought. I like
Well,
being
I
able
would
to
say that the
drop
other
it.
benefit is, Sabira, you're such a niche of a consumer. We're
Yeah.
like, duh, used, yes. But I think you always are one pushing me to be like, no, other people don't think like us, and that isn't the most immediate option. I think that's maybe where you headed, Amanda, on that. I didn't mean to lead the witness too much on that.
There is, but there's also something more happening. So, like, Patagonia is a great example. They have entire collections that come out of worn wear, and it's almost like a collector's item. They have beautifully reassembled garments, and they're one-offs, and I think they're really cool, and you want to be able to say, like, ooh, it's worn wear. Or, I mean, not to keep coming back to Arc'teryx, but they do such a good job of this. They release special collections that are kind of recut, resewn from previous garments. They're limited edition. They're actually expensive. They're maybe more expensive than the original one would be new. So you can play with it. There's a lot you can do. I can't remember what Canada Goose is calling their collection, but because Canada Goose has such a devoted following, they have these like collector's items where these vintage pieces cost way more than they would have cost new. So you can create a cachet around it, but you have to give it a name. If you're just calling it used or pre-loved, then it doesn't have quite the same sex appeal. Doc Martens is such a good example. They have such a history. Like when you think of all the people in rock and roll that have worn them, if you can then start collecting, which I think they're doing, collecting pre-worn pieces by, famous musicians, there's a whole story you can build around it that you can't really do if you're just saying that it's used.
Well, that to your story point of that in Sabira, then that's kind of the purpose of Canada Goose Generations, I think is their label.
Generations,
so that
exactly.
The multiple, the premium, every piece has a story to tell. Yeah.
It kind of goes from like thrifting to vintage, right? It's just almost like that. You have a different idea in your mind of what it is.
And you just nailed the piece about branding these things. Like, there is value when you make it vintage, when you make it collector, when you make it something that feels really premium, like you have to get on it right away. If it's just, here, you can have this piece for cheaper, that's a different proposition. But I think especially if you're in high-end luxury goods, you could be devaluing the brand by stepping into resale. You may want to curate a really niche collection and exclude some things. You might not want to resell everything. So you want to make sure that your platform aligns with your brand story and your brand pillars.
I thought I interrupted you on that last question, Sabira, but I got to go to here. So then...
I do have
Go for it. You do have a question. Okay.
One thing, I mean, as you were talking about that, one study that came back to mind is that I think Harvard published something, I would have to pull up the stats, but that they did some research that brands that do offer take backs actually find that they have more loyal customers over time because the customer even has the option, not even necessarily because they're using it. And as you were talking about like that premium, my brain goes in kind of like two directions. One is like, great, you have a model to sell to brands. There is data and justification, and there is brand benefit of doing Second Life option. But then the environmentalist in me was like, but if you're not making it about all of your products, then isn't it just cheating? Like you're just trying to get more net new sales. So I have like the dichotomy of like, ugh.
Well, it's interesting, Amanda, before we get your take on that, I think you're referencing that customers spent 4.8% more after they became aware of the manufacturer's take-back program.
Exactly.
Customers then spent 5.9% more on their second visit, and then 9.8% more on their third visit after that first visit, which is kind of a nice little trend line there.
It is. This is constant question and constant conflict. The environmentalist in each of us says, aren't we doing this because we're trying to reduce the amount of net new product in the world? The marketer in me says, well, I guess we've done a really good job then. We live in this tension. This is our world. We want to see a better planet, and also we know that we want businesses to grow, and those are in conflict sometimes.
I like that tension. That tension is what brought me to circular economy. I mean, like, that's where it's like, okay, I don't know how much can be done about curbing the consumption of goods from a mass audience and a mass consuming base. But if that decision can be integrated into more circular economy principles to help alleviate the impact of a desire to purchase more, Sabira, I just don't think we're going to be able to undo people's want of some great new digs or whatever, like whatever they're going to be wearing.
And I've zero data to back this up except for my own personal experience.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that the more people become aware of the impact of their purchases, and sometimes circular shopping is the thing that makes them aware of this, the better the decisions they're going to make. I've seen it in my own life. In the last 5 years, my new purchases probably has gone down to about 25% of what it used to be. And my purchasing altogether has probably gone down to about 70% of what it used to be, because every time I buy something new, I am thinking of that bigger picture. And I think before I stepped into working in this space, I just wasn't thinking about the impact. It's in my face all the time because of the clients that we work with. But I like to think that the first time you make a circular purchase, maybe that's your entry point, and you're still going to buy as much new stuff.
Yes.
But every time you go deeper into that ecosystem, you become more conscious.
Yeah.
Well, it's the only big selling point we have, though, for major brands right now is they want to say, okay, we'll start this if it means we can lock some consumers in and we can really get them to love us. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's how that's sort of our loss leader there, is we say, yes, okay, we'll do that. And then we'll keep figuring out how to reduce the impact from there.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a conversation you all have all the time.
Yes, all the time.
We're all selling things.
Yes.
Things.
I mean, one of my favorite use cases was, and I talk about this often, was Lexus. And Lexus was one of the first innovators on the certified pre-owned car sales, and how that was changing the perception of used cars from, and no offense to mom and pop car dealerships out there, but changing the perception of what a used car would look like from a used car dealership, and changing that into, a premium experience with a certified pre-owned vehicle, so that Lexus could, in their terms, get butts in seats and then upsell them from there into the C classes, or that's Mercedes. That shows how much I know my luxury vehicles. But it's whatever their upsell would be. Again, there was another thought there, Amanda.
They make more money on those used vehicles anyway. We haven't figured out how to do that in the apparel side of things
exactly.
yet.
You're right. Yes.
But at the end of the day, I mean, maybe Eileen Fisher does, because I think Eileen Fisher, they just have a flat $5 buyback. They end up buying back a lot of things they will never sell, so maybe that's where they lose money. But if you're like, no matter how good or bad it is, we're going to buy it for $5 and maybe we're going to sell it for $100, that's a pretty amazing margin. Whereas most brands will price the buyback based on the quality or the original price of the garment.
Yeah, and I love, and that kind of is tied to an earlier thought you had on the experience, the luxury experience versus maybe some other tiers of apparel where they can command certain price points that will lead to higher margins, and they might be able to engage with that model a little bit, but it might be just a little more appetizing to them over the long run. Yes, ma'am, Sabira.
Well,
I noticed.
I'm like bursting to ask this question. I'm like, okay, so now you're going after the dog walker who isn't your avid outdoorsy mountaineer person. Like, what do you say to them to now pay close to $800? Like, how does it actually become a real customer base? It almost feels like you're starting from scratch, that you're a startup, and that's what I would guess. But you're also saying lean into the existing branding. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole sequence of events, right? If that dog walker isn't looking to you in the first place, you need to find out how to acquire them top of funnel. So it's figuring out what's that awareness campaign that's going to talk to quality, but also speak to a certain level of affordability. You know, it is significantly more affordable, but the quality is really what's there. So you have your performance marketing campaign, and then you drop them into ideally your email funnel. And that's where the fun really starts. And that's where, for us, the challenge is really exciting, because as storytellers, I love sitting down with a brand. I don't get to do this anymore. My team does, but it's so fun to sit down with a brand, look at a product line, and decide what the stories are going to be for a quarter of emails or a season of emails. It's so different in the used gear space. And so you're putting yourself in the mindset of that recreationalist, someone that's maybe dabbling in the outdoors or whatever sphere, depending on what the brand is, and thinking, how are they using this product in their daily life? And then you're telling stories that are not product dependent to get them to think about using the gear. You're not talking about this like color of blue for the season. You're maybe talking about the performance of a fabric that you carry season to season, or a technical feature that has always run through the line, or some consistent product line like technical performance gear is a great example because they usually release the same product over and over again with updates. So you can talk about a collection, the Atom jacket. So telling those stories is really fun. And the choices that brands need to make are often things like, do we have a separate line of marketing for our used and resale product, or do we just incorporate that into our main line? Like, are we assuming that customer is going to respond to our mainline marketing, or are we keeping them totally different, like really leaning into it? Yeah.
So that gets into the segmentation.
Yes.
How do you start to approach that from a marketing perspective? I mean, I got your newsletter probably an hour before we started hit recording, and I it was great. I kind of looked through, and then I got to a section that you were talking about debrand. But there was clearly so much more before we got to maybe a circularity story. I was willing to see, okay, where's she going with this? And then I got to a story that really hit me. In terms of segmenting a user or consumer, not a user in tech terms, but in terms of consumer, where are you segmenting? How are you sort of talking about with your stakeholders that you have for a brand, or what's their vision? How does that go? How does that happen?
Yeah, segmentation is always ideal. Not every company is big enough to do it.
Yes.
Not everyone has that capacity. So if you have a 2-person marketing team, you're probably not going to send out like 3 or 4 different emails in a week. So let's say your ideal cadence is that every single consumer is getting 1 to 2 emails from you a week. That's pretty intense. You don't want to overdo it. So if you're a huge brand that is already in that 1 to 2 emails a week, all of a sudden you throw in another dedicated email that has to do with your used program, that's going to be too much. You're going to drive up your unsubscribes. So you really have to work together, and hopefully your marketing team maybe isn't separate from your used marketing team, or you have a dedicated person that sits on that team and is championing those initiatives. Maybe it's like every month you have one dedicated email towards your circularity program. Or, if you have lots of different initiatives, maybe it's only every other month, but maybe you always have a footer, or you have some banner that promotes it. Or if you're really worried about cannibalizing your gear, then you start to segment right away, no matter how small you are. Segmentation is ideal, especially if your audiences are so diverse. So if you're filling your funnel with ads that are specifically related to your circularity program, then building a dedicated list from those new inbound leads is going to be your best bet if you have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, that's so helpful in even helping me understand my own segmenting ability. What's that communication like across your team, their team, multiple teams' visions for hopefully not cannibalizing net new sales, seeing the vision and the passion for this new circular opportunity? How are you as sort of a contracted entity always having to balance those communication streams?
We start by understanding their model. So, like I've said, every brand is different. Some have no concerns about cannibalization to the point where they are literally selling their used product on their mainline PDP.
They're bought in.
So they're totally bought in, and maybe their collections don't change enough. Maybe they just have consistent products season after season, so they can do this. Where I am shopping on a website, I find a gray sweatshirt that I like, I'm given the option right on the PDP of getting it new or getting it used, and I can pick. And there are platforms like Recurate that give you the ability to do that, which was just acquired by Trove. So I'm sure we'll start to see some of that functionality integrated into
And you might see an interview coming up with one of those. Yes.
I love that. That's great. So So knowing how their brand, they want their brand to show up, knowing what their business model is, that really helps us to decide. If they are concerned about cannibalization, like Lululemon, we didn't work with them on this, but they're a perfect example. When they launched Like New, they did it so quietly. They wanted to participate and they wanted to get their foot in the door, but it for a while was really hard to find that page. They are so deliberate about how they preserve their brand that they wanted to tread really lightly into that space. So as far as I know, they didn't come out with a bang and they didn't put it front and center, and they definitely didn't do a big splash to their main email list, for example. I'm not sure how they've gone on to build that, but it's kind of like if you know, and you have to look for it a little bit. Whereas another brand really might want to make a big celebration. I remember Carrie from Canada Goose, when they launched their platform, she put it on LinkedIn. There was a big celebration. They were really proud of it. So we would figure out what they want to do, and then we develop a program around it, whether that's a dedicated email list. A big part of it when you're first launching, you two know this really well, is just supply. So you have to start by actually letting people know that you have take back. So that's the initial, but you start putting that in some of your mainline emails is like, hey, do you have some stuff that's collecting dust in your closet? Did you know we will buy this back for however much? So you got to build up.
Well, I love it. It's supply is I'm fascinated by, because it's like you have to start kicking off that flywheel and getting that product back. Something happening live for listeners that might be interested in. Rimowa, which is a luxury brand that I'm personally obsessed with, just recently launched their own take back, except all it is a portion of their website that says, we're interested in this, but we need product. So it's they're the ones that are now trying to source that product. And I'm going to be super fascinated. It's like, okay, these are people that love their Rimowa products. How willing is that going to be in terms of a velocity of products on the take back and then the return back to the secondary market? And so I'm really interested to see how that's going to kick off.
I'm going to be following that one closely because people love the wear and tear on their Rimowa as well. Like
exactly.
The stories that are inherent in every one of those dents and scratches.
Yes.
But on the flip side, collectors will also love that. Like, who wouldn't want a Rimowa suitcase that looks like it's been around the world, even if you haven't been around the world with it?
And that's why I'm also fascinated, is this is a product that is very popular in other secondary market channels. And I think if I were to go purchase one from a secondary market channel, I would probably want to turn to them, the actual storefront. But they're going to be competing with people that really want this. And it's a cool thing to see is how much of a market is really, how much there is an appetite for those types of products in that market, that it has a high secondary value. So I'm really excited to kind of keep an eye on that. I don't know if that one's
going to be a volume play. I think that's going to be a margin play. I think they're going to have like a niche, small amount, and people will pay a lot maybe because it was like a limited edition release or something. So if they're going to make any money off of it, they're really going to have to mark them up and make them have stories behind them.
I love that take. Yeah, I'm excited. We'll have to actually, I've been trying to track down anybody at Rimowa, so maybe someone's going to do this. So please reach out, and then Amanda, we can revisit this upcoming in a year or so.
Yeah. Rimowa, if you need help marketing your program,
exactly.
You know who to hit up.
Exactly.
Well, I'm starting to wonder now. I mean, we've talked a lot about like the luxury brands having kind of an upper hand in this game. Where is there room? I have multiple questions. Where is there room for the volume players who aren't pricing their products already at like the $800 mark, the $400 mark? How can they get involved? Or have you seen any examples? It's kind of one question. And then the like other is, in both scenarios, you still have this unpredictability in supply and demand. So how, from a marketing perspective, do you deal with that? I'm not sure why I just asked you two questions.
I'll answer the first question first. I'll answer the second question first. Special events and incentives are a really good way to do it. So maybe you have a dedicated 2 to 3 week period where the credit you get for bringing your used product back is like significantly higher just for that limited time. We did do that with Arc'teryx. They had a huge influx of product, and it really helped get things going. So incentivizing it maybe at a loss for the first little bit is really the way to get going.
And the term for that is seeding, which I've been obsessed with. It's literally, it's a strategy of you overpay to seed your secondary marketplace, and then you just kind of hopefully kick off that flywheel action.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the same thing as overpaying, like having a really bad return on ad spend when you launch a new product. When you're launching a new product, you're paying so much to acquire a new customer. And so maybe it's that equivalent. And I'm sure you talk about this a lot. A lot of brands use returns when they're launching things. So maybe it's not actually used. It's just returns and it's been sitting, and it's a good way to have some product out of the gate. The first question I had an answer for, and now I've totally forgotten what the question was. Ask it again.
That's my own fault. It's because I did the two in a row. The volume brands, the brands that aren't premium brands. What's up? How do they?
It's very doable. I think there's a threshold. I think we'd have a really hard time seeing a brand like H&M, Shein, Zara. Zara maybe because they have some pieces that became collector's items that people just loved, but there has to be a quality threshold. A brand that I think has done a good job of this is Madewell. Madewell is kind of a mid-market, they'll do some pop-ups, kind of store in store where they'll move a high volume of product. And that's when it's not so much a margin game, it's really a volume game. But it's also really easy to get that product out of people's closets because it's more trend driven. I'm moving right now. I'm clearing out so much stuff. I have things that, my sister who lives in a more rural area might be like, this is still really current. Why are you getting rid of this? But because I work in fashion a lot of the time and I live in a city, I'm like, oh, that's so 2 years ago, I'm going to sell that or pass it off. And so there's always going to be a market for what someone else is kind of moving beyond from a trend perspective.
I have to hand it to Madewell. I've gotten 2 indicators in the past 4 years probably of some success of entering the market where either my mom is super excited or the news was so exciting to an ex-girlfriend of mine that she felt like she needed to relate to me the fact that this industry I care about has somehow intersected her life of loving Madewell products. And it was like, that's super cool. Okay, I'll take that as a market indicator of how much of a barrier that was and how much it was surpassed by that love of Madewell products.
Here's another theory that I have. This is how you know you have a really clearly defined personal brand when your exes text you about something they know you're going to be interested in. I'm always amazed to see what makes my exes come out of the woodwork.
That's a great point. That is an excellent point. Yes. So what's the future of this communication, of creatively sort of talking about how we get more consumers to that point of sale, either online, in store, getting to that point of saying, hey, I think this whatever it might be for me. What's your take on that? What's the future look like for that communication track and that consumer action?
I don't think that, I could be totally wrong. I don't think we're going to see a huge change in terms of how we communicate things. I think we're going to see a big change in terms of what we communicate and what's considered news in this space. So the example that I love to point to is when Everlane first came out with their fleece that was made from recycled water bottles. Everyone was shouting about it. It was such a big deal. Oh my God, this thing was made from entirely recycled product. Now we know a little bit more. We know that, those fleeces represented the end of life for those water bottles. There's no more use for those. We can't recycle that fleece, but if it was turned into another water bottle, we could have. Not many people are shouting about the number of water bottles in their product anymore. There's been an evolution. Now people are shouting about biomaterials, what? The petroleum for this garment didn't come from oil. It didn't come from something that can go back into the system like water bottles. It came from this plant. And so I think we're going to start to see an understanding that petroleum products, which we depend on. Let's just be honest. We depend on synthetics. I'm not going to deny that. We're going to see people that maybe aren't in the industry, because I think we've moved a step beyond that already, they're going to start to celebrate bio-based materials. And then from there, there's going to be an understanding that none of it is exciting unless it's biodegradable. So let's just jump right to that and find materials that are natural, that are biodegradable. Let's start to find really cool solutions that turn things like merino into the level of performance that we get from Gore-Tex. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? I love Gore-Tex. I'm not going to pretend that I don't. I use it every day. I buy trail runners, constantly, and I choose them for Gore-Tex, even though I know the impact they have on the environment because they perform. So I think the future is us going to be talking about products that perform as well as synthetics, but that biodegrade. And I think there's going to be a very gradual understanding and acceptance, the same way that there has been with water bottles, of that.
Yeah, I love that. Mostly on my end, I think I hate also being the pin sometimes to people's joy when they're like, this is made from recycled water bottles. And I'm like, great, that was 4 years ago. We got to keep on moving up that value chain and get to more higher level items there. And I think you're right. There's an evolution of this conversation that we are finding ourselves in at the forefront. Mm-hmm. And we will hopefully we all can keep positioning ourselves to be in that, and that consumers are going to track right along. Yes, ma'am, Sabira. Oh, go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, to that end, I also think resale is increasingly becoming table stakes, and it will be. I think we won't even think to go to Marketplace or eBay or Poshmark. We'll think to go to the brand first before we start looking at all those secondary channels.
And I think it was Karen Dilly of one of our first episodes who was talking about how it's just going to be a part of any omni-channel strategy. And it's been one of my favorite sort of lines of saying it's going to, for all of our next generations, it's going to be like, oh, why didn't you have that? That doesn't make any sense that wasn't a part of your economy. Why did you let
someone else get that revenue?
Yes.
I'm wondering, have the brands started to think about, because as you were talking about diluting, the potential to dilute the brands, one of the areas that we see that happen is, like, I've bought Madewell jeans at a TJ Maxx, and I think that has like an impact on my mind. I'm like, oh, I don't need to go to Madewell because I might find something at TJ Maxx. Is there a conversation around like reducing overproduction so that they can, like, if they're going to be able to harness the power of the Second Life marketplace and market, are they going to be able to actually reduce production and avoid those kind of like liquidation channels? Are brands thinking about that yet?
I think they're thinking about it. I think there's always a conversation about it. I think the reality is so challenging. Like, we just don't know. I mean, in the outdoor and active industry, we're in this major dip right now because everyone forecasts based on their COVID numbers when everyone was buying a bike, not thinking about the fact that once you have a bike, you don't need another one for maybe 5 to 10 years. So everyone overproduced. It's just par for the course that the nature of the economy and the news cycle makes it really hard to forecast. I think there's brands that are deliberately underproducing and just taking the quote unquote hit of knowing that there might have been 1,000 other people that would have bought that product and you were sold out. And that is a really conscious choice, but it's a hard choice for companies to make that have incentives to grow.
Well, what an interesting intervention moment then for those companies to think about resale channels. And has that ever been a part of that conversation where it's about that production strategy, that manufacturing strategy, and saying, okay, how do we curb this to maybe offer a new line now? Have you heard that before?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but at the end of the day, if overproduction, it's hard to kind of put overstock in a resale channel necessarily.
Fair.
They might want to keep it purely used product as opposed to like, hey, we made too much.
Yeah, and the question was probably not as accurate as I intended. I think where I was getting with that is I love that idea that if there's strategist at a company that is producing a product, that they might look back and say, hey, we're going to try to actually not overextend our manufacturing capability in order to meet what could be a hypothetical demand, and instead try to instigate a new type of consumer that might be more interested in resale. And I think that's where I was like, okay, if more than anything, maybe I'm just projecting this out in the universe to have someone go, oh, that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, maybe we should think about that. But that's where I'm more fascinated with that.
I think every brand wants to manufacture the perfect amount. I think that's just like
true.
Par for the course. Nobody wants to overproduce, but I was having lunch on last Thursday with the head of sales and marketing for Kathmandu brand. So they have Quicksilver, Obos, Kathmandu, and he was saying that in some products they're deliberately gonna only produce a certain amount, even though they know they may sell more. There's just certain products that they're not gonna buy that heavily into for their channels. But there's some product that they're always gonna overproduce because they know there's a good chance, like t-shirts are always gonna move, and so you don't want to throw away that opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's what, again, I just find myself being obsessed with that idea that there is a future for a strategist to say, you know what, we're actually going to curb our manufacturing and see what we can do here to boost this secondary market channel, and that it will be a net positive for them on the margin sale in the end. And that's, I think that would be really, if someone's out there doing that, that's what I would love to hear about. Are you making that conscious decision?
You make your product also, just like, it becomes almost more premium, more collectible because there's less out there, potentially.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe that's just putting it out. Just like, maybe that's going to come back to us. Yeah. What gives you hope, Sabira?
Yeah, I was going to say, as we round this out, Amanda, we normally like to close with, why are you hopeful and where do you see the world going from here?
Yeah. I'm hopeful because everyone that I know, whether they work on the sustainability side or not, in brand side, are having these conversations. Everyone's asking us about it. People are genuinely curious, and I think that there is a desire, even if we're not seeing the demand from consumers yet, which if you actually look at kind of, who's shopping on what channels and the uptick on, the Poshmarks and Vestiaires of the world, the demand is growing. But maybe certain companies aren't seeing it from their customers, but internally, everyone I know is having this conversation, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, me too. That's love to hear that. Amanda, thank you for joining us today. You also have a podcast. What is your new podcast called?
Oh, my podcast is called My Best Campaign. And on it, we bring in CMOs, marketing directors, owners of businesses, and have them talk about one sort of landmark campaign. And campaign can be interpreted lots of different ways. Sometimes it's a big PR blitz. Sometimes it's a major content marketing moment or an experiential moment. And I get them to talk about what made it work, where it maybe went wrong, what they learned from it, and then reflect on kind of what they are taking forward from that and any trends and insights that they see in marketing right now.
Okay. Well, I know I've got some episodes to catch up on. You're on number 4 or 5, I think. Did I see that correctly?
4 is out. Upcoming, we've got a former head of brand marketing for Athleta, for Rafa, the head of global brand for Live Cycling. So lots of like sports side of things, but also some other more lifestyle-y. Got some Nike chats, just good stuff.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for taking the time today, and I look forward to checking back in on some of these updates, and hopefully we can get around these brands. Thank you.